This summary of the Gospel of Mark provides information about the title, authors, date of writing, chronology, theme, theology, outline, a brief overview, and the chapters of the Gospel of Mark. Author. Although there is no direct internal evidence of authorship, it was the unanimous testimony of the early church that this Gospel was written by John Mark. The most important evidence comes from Papias, who quotes an even earlier source as saying, 1. Mark was a close associate of Peter, from whom he received the tradition of the things said and done by the Lord. 2. This tradition did not come to Mark as a finished, sequential account of the life of our Lord, but as the preaching of Peter, preaching directed to the needs of the early Christian communities. 3. Mark accurately preserved this material. The conclusion drawn from this tradition is that the Gospel of Mark largely consists of the preaching of Peter arranged and shaped by Mark. John Mark in the NT. It is generally agreed that the Mark who is associated with Peter in the early non-biblical tradition is also the John Mark of the NT. The first mention of him is in connection with his mother, Mary, who had a house in Jerusalem that served as a meeting place for believers. When Paul and Barnabas returned to Antioch from Jerusalem after the famine visit, Mark accompanied them. Mark next appears as a helper to Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary journey, but he deserted them at Perga in Pamphylia to return to Jerusalem. Paul must have been deeply disappointed with Mark's actions on this occasion, because when Barnabas proposed taking Mark on the second journey, Paul flatly refused, a refusal that broke up their working relationship. Barnabas took Mark, who was his cousin, and departed for Cyprus. No further mention is made of either of them in the book of Acts. Mark reappears in Paul's letter to the Colossians written from Rome. Paul sends a greeting from Mark and adds, "You have received instructions about him. If he comes to you, welcome him." At this point, Mark was apparently beginning to win his way back into Paul's confidence. By the end of Paul's life, Mark had fully regained Paul's favor. Date of composition. Some, who hold that Matthew and Luke used Mark as a major source, have suggested that Mark may have been composed in the 50s or early 60s. Others have felt that the content of the Gospel and statements made about Mark by the early church fathers indicate that the book was written shortly before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Place of origin. According to early church tradition, Mark was written in the regions of Italy or, more specifically, in Rome. These same authors closely associate Mark's writing of the Gospel with the Apostle Peter. The above evidence is consistent with 1. The historical probability that Peter was in Rome during the last days of his life and was martyred there, and 2. The biblical evidence that Mark also was in Rome about the same time and was closely associated with Peter. Recipients. The evidence points to the church at Rome, or at least to Gentile readers. Mark explains Jewish customs, translates Aramaic words, and seems to have a special interest in persecution and martyrdom, subjects of special concern to Roman believers. A Roman destination would explain the almost immediate acceptance of this gospel and its rapid dissemination. Occasion and purpose.